Hi, my name is James Arthur. I am CEO and co-founder of Vaxine. I'm British originally, but I now live in Istria in Western Croatia. I am a software developer and an entrepreneur. Actually, when I was 12 years old, at the beginning of secondary school, I remember we had a computer lab. I think for a couple of years, I used to go in my break times and kind of hang out in this computer lab. And so we had a room full of early Apple Mac computers. And I remember, for instance, making a computer game in HyperCard, which was a kind of terrible kind of stop motion animation clone of Dizzy Egg, which was a kind of platform game I remember playing at the time. And they had this sort of thing where you moved around between screens in the game, and you found sort of smelly teachers and sort of funny things in the rooms. So I think thinking back, my first exposure to computing was actually kind of at that stage. And I guess obviously it kind of fit my brain and I was quite interested in it at the time, to the point of, I remember copying that game onto floppy disks and selling them for 50p a copy to other kids in the school, who quickly realized that they didn't need to buy the game because you could just copy a floppy disk for free. So I remember pretending to them that I'd put DRM on it, when my DRM was in fact just moving the little switch on the back of the floppy to set it into read-only mode, which took a while to get rumbled. So as well as an early computing experience, perhaps it was also an early example of startup hustle. I've done all sorts of stuff in my career. I did a philosophy degree. I went into advertising, urban regeneration, working for a charity called Groundwork. I then joined what was initially a video production agency, and which sort of turned into a digital agency. And I worked there for 6 years in London. Did a whole bunch of really interesting projects, working with people like Apple and IDEO and the United Nations. I then became a freelance software developer. Started collaborating with an architecture company called 00. We did some digital manufacturing projects, an open source construction system called WikiHouse. I then did my first VC funded company, which was a digital manufacturing platform called OpenDesk, where you could download furniture all over the world and make it locally using CNC mills. After that, I had a couple of children and moved out from London to live in a town called Shrewsbury on the English-Welsh border. There I started collaborating with a friend of mine, Dr. Luke Robinson, and with some others as well. We created what we realized later became a venture builder. So I then did, I think, 5 VC-funded startups at the same time. So one of them was called Hazy. Hazy's a synthetic data company, generates very smart, statistically accurate fake data. So you can do data analytics and machine learning model training on artificial data without leaking the personal information or private information in the source data set, which is a very successful company that's sort of gone through multiple rounds now of VC funding. And I was the CTO and co-founder there. And then after a few years, I kind of transitioned out as it became clear that firstly, the company needed a CTO who understood the maths, and also because I was doing too many things at the same time and needed someone dedicated. But I also worked with a company called LGN, which was an edge AI company based in Zagreb, a couple of ag tech companies, an emotional AI company. And then around, so I was living in Shrewsbury kind of around the beginning of COVID. And in the first lockdown period, we decided to escape the kind of COVID and Brexit madness and move to Istria. And then I was really looking for what I wanted to do as a next company. It was really talking to more kind of technical friends that it kind of led me into researching more of the literature into stronger consistency modes for distributed databases, or AP, eventual consistency distributed databases. And that's where I discovered the work on CRDTs, highly available transactions, sticky availability, causal consistency, transactional causal consistency. I discovered how those were combined in the Cure protocol, which was implemented in Antidote DB, and I discovered the Antidote DB project. My background is as a generalist software developer. And I've worked in a range of different languages. For instance, I kind of first worked mainly in Python and then Ruby and JavaScript. And but more recently, I've been using Elixir as my main language for the last few years. And so discovering Antidote as an Erlang system built on the Beam was very accessible. It was very attractive as a system to look to build on because of the choice of technology and building on the Beam and OTP architecture. Having discovered the research base and some of the outputs like Antidote DB, I reached out to some of the people who are involved in the project, and they recommended that I speak to Dr. Annette Bieniusa. So I contacted her, and she set me up on a call with her and Nuno Pregathia and Mark Shapiro. And they were very, very open to collaborating and looking to establish a project where we could build out a database system on top of Antidote DB. And it was then through a series of workshops with them and then with my co-founder, Volta, that we kind of evolved the concept of building a rich CRDT database system on top of Antidote. So it's a low latency global database. It comes from this kind of AP research tradition, and it's built on core CRDT technology. However, the two things that we're really aiming to add are, one, a simpler developer experience for people who are coming and looking to use that type of database technology who are not distributed systems or CRDT specialists, and also adding back in stronger database guarantees that as a generalist developer you would be used to working with. So things like unique constraints, check constraints, and referential integrity. So I'm the CEO at Vaxine, which means I am fundamentally responsible for building the company, raising the investment, and providing the direction which the team is working towards. My background is that I've tended to play the role as CTO on previous companies, and I am a generalist software developer and technical. And I think it works well for this type of company because we're building a developer product. And therefore, to understand the right product to build, you have to be sensitive to that kind of developer audience and user base in a way where we're targeting generalist developers, maybe working on, say, multi-user collaboration systems or gaming platforms or edge data platforms. That's exactly the kind of stuff that I've built over my career. So I think I'm fortunate in a way of kind of that I am our ideal customer, and thus I'm able to bring some kind of generalist perspective to things like developer experience and usability. But my hard responsibilities are essentially providing the direction, making sure that we have the funding, and making sure that we build the company successfully. I think there is also an opportunity to look further ahead, not just at the database sector, but at the cloud computing and distributed computing landscape in general. There's a fantastic paper by Joe Hellerstein and the kind of research group in the US called New Directions for Cloud Programming. And it very articulately builds out an argument for, once you start with these AP, eventually consistent systems, and you start to do what we're doing around adding on database constraints and particular consistency semantics to preserve invariance, you can generalize that into explicit consistency specifications. And there's a lot of very interesting work being done on that through things like the ECROS project, Gallifrey, Hydro project, etc. So already in the research base, you see that there's a lot of work gone into extending this type of invariant safety for eventual consistency into explicit consistency. But what that New Directions paper does is it generalizes that further. So rather than just explicit consistency, it takes it to explicit availability, latency, resource provisioning. And once you kind of conceive of it like that, and you think about it in terms of things like resource claims, then it's clear the analogy with systems like Kubernetes today. So in a way, as the cloud has evolved as a kind of new global computer and kind of hardware system, the question is have we actually developed the operating system for the cloud yet? And certainly there were sort of some first some first iterations of that, and you have kind of the HashiCorp systems and things like Terraform, and then you've had Kubernetes, which has sort of come along and basically become the dominant orchestration system for the cloud. But if you consider Kubernetes against a system that would be an optimal way of distributing out compute units so that you can trade off concerns like consistency and availability, it doesn't come close. And so in a way, our opportunity to disrupt this enormous database sector is just the thin end of the wedge to potentially being able to then build out onto the technology to define what cloud computing looks like in future. And so that's why I see that the market opportunity and generally the opportunities for what we're doing are unlimited. And I'm tremendously excited about being able to put ourselves in a situation to go and find out what is there on the other side once we go over that tipping point.